Chosen one, this message is not an accident, not a coincidence, not just another voice crossing your path for a few passing minutes before disappearing into the noise. Heaven has been watching your hidden walk. God has seen the roads you traveled when no one else knew how heavy your feet felt. He has seen the prayers you whispered through clenched teeth, the tears you hid behind closed doors, the moments you were tempted to become colder, harder, and more distant after everything you carried. But the real test was never only about whether you could survive pain. It was about whether you could keep the heart of Christ while moving through betrayal, silence, rejection, and misunderstanding. It was about whether pain would make you cruel or whether surrender would make you deeper. And because you are still here, still listening, still hungry for truth, this is your confirmation that something is shifting. A season of heavenly release is beginning. The things God formed in secret are not staying buried forever. The love you carried, the purity you protected, the humility you chose, all of it has been recorded. So stay with this message all the way through, because it is not entertainment for the curious, it is confirmation for the consecrated. And if your spirit knows this word is for you, receive it fully, let it settle into your bones and carry it with faith. You can also declare your agreement in your own way by liking, sharing, subscribing, or simply whispering to God, I am ready for what heaven has prepared. Because this is not about hype, it is about alignment, and alignment is what opens the next door. And as that door begins to open, you must understand that one of the highest reasons heaven leaned toward you is because you chose love when it hurt. There are many people who can love when life is easy, when relationships are mutual, when kindness is returned, when loyalty feels safe and comfort is uninterrupted. But the deeper test was whether love would remain in you when pain knocked the wind out of your chest. It is one thing to speak of grace when you have never been betrayed, but it is another thing entirely to hold a clean spirit after someone wounds you with full knowledge of your sincerity. You know what it is to stand in that fire. You know what it is to be rejected and still refuse to poison your own soul with hatred. You know what it is to be misunderstood and still kneel down in prayer for the very people who drained you. The world calls this foolishness because the world only understands power when it looks like retaliation, but the kingdom understands something greater. Real strength is revealed in the person who has every reason to become bitter and still chooses to remain tender before God. There were moments when your heart could have hardened like stone. There were nights when resentment would have felt more natural than mercy. There were conversations you replayed in your mind wounds. You could not explain disappointments that made you question why you kept showing up with sincerity in a world that often rewards masks more than truth. Yet even there, something in you refused to fully collapse into darkness. Not because you never felt anger, but because anger was not allowed to become your ruler. Not because betrayal did not hurt, but because pain was not permitted to rewrite your identity. You learned something sacred in those seasons. Love is not weakness. Love is warfare. Love is not passivity. Love is resistance against the corrosion of the soul. Every time you prayed instead of plotted, every time you released instead of retaliated, every time you chose to keep your spirit soft while guarding your boundaries, you were passing a test more powerful than many people ever realize. You were proving that what lived inside you came from a deeper source than emotion alone. You were proving that your character had roots. This is why heaven honored your response. God was not only watching what happened to you, he was watching what happened in you. That distinction matters. Many people can survive suffering and still lose themselves in the process. Many can endure heartbreak but become cynical, sharp, defensive, and hidden behind layers of self-protection that slowly choke the life out of their calling. But your obedience looked different. You kept bringing your broken pieces back to God instead of building a throne for your pain. You kept choosing intercession over performance. You kept choosing the narrow road of love when the wider road of bitterness seemed more justified. This is why your tears were never wasted. This is why what looked like weakness to others was actually one of the greatest signs of spiritual authority forming beneath the surface. Because anyone can mimic strength for a moment, but only a heart transformed by God can keep producing mercy under pressure. And that leads naturally into the truth that your character survived the pressure because the fire that came against you is not random. Pressure has a strange way of stripping off the decorative pieces of identity and revealing what is really holding a person up. Comfort can make many people look mature. Favor can make many people sound spiritual. But chaos reveals what calm was built on. Misunderstanding reveals where identity actually rests. Delay reveals whether faith was rooted in God or in quick outcomes. You are not tested in a polished environment where everything around you made faith convenient. You are tested where it was costly. You are pressed in silence, provoked in relationships, weighed down by invisible battles, and pushed into corners where your old self could easily have reappeared. People touched places in you that once would have exploded. Situations reopened memories you thought were fully healed. Accusations and misrepresentations gave you countless opportunities to defend yourself in the flesh. And yet despite all of that, you did not return to the lowest version of yourself. That matters more than you know. Growth is not proven by how spiritual you sound when you feel safe. It is proven by what remains true in you when life becomes unfair. It is proven by whether your convictions still breathe when your emotions are struggling to catch up. It is proven by whether you can be under pressure without becoming possessed by it. You've already lived enough to know how tempting it is to react. There is a kind of instant relief that revenge promises a false sense of control that comes from speaking too fast, exposing too much, or proving too aggressively. But you were being trained for something higher. Each time you paused instead of each time you carried your frustration into prayer, instead of turning it into public fear, each time you let silence become strength, instead of suppression, your spirit was maturing. This does not mean you felt nothing. It means you were learning governance. It means your emotions no longer got to lead your destiny by themselves. It means your old patterns were being interrupted by a higher nature. Spiritual maturity is not numbness. It is surrendered order. It is the ability to feel deeply without letting feeling alone become your compass. And that is what heaven saw in you. God saw that when pressure increased, your posture still bent toward Him. You were not perfect, but you were yielded. You were not unshaken, but you were submitted. You were not untouched by the storm, but you were no longer fully ruled by it. That is what qualified you. Because leadership in the kingdom is not given merely to the gifted. It is entrusted to those whose inner life can survive friction without cracking into chaos. Your character was being measured in hidden ways. Could you remain honest when exaggeration would make you look better? Could you remain peaceful when others were baiting you into pettiness? Could you remain faithful when results were slow and recognition was absent? Could you remain teachable when the process bruised your ego? These are not small things. These are weight-bearing pillars. And the more you endured without abandoning your core, the more heaven saw someone who could be trusted with greater influence, greater favor, and greater spiritual weight. That is why what felt like delay was often development. God was not ignoring your pain. He was using it to test the strength of what He had already planted in you. And still, some of your greatest victories happened in places where no one else was watching. Which is why you must understand that you passed the silent tests no one saw. The world is fascinated by public moments. People celebrate visible wins, titles, applause numbers, and obvious breakthroughs. But heaven is moved by another kind of evidence. Heaven watches what a person does in the dark, Heaven weighs what choices are made in rooms without cameras, without praise, without human validation. And this is where so much of your real promotion was born. Not in the spotlight, but in the unseen battles that almost no one could describe because almost no one knew they were happening. There were nights when your mind was under siege and no one knew how loud the warfare was. There were mornings when simply choosing discipline over despair felt like a private miracle. There were temptations you resisted that no one ever applauded. Decisions you made to walk away from what still appealed to your flesh. Acts of obedience that looked small from the outside but cost you something real on the inside. You deleted what you could have hidden. You turned away from what you could have secretly entertained. You remained faithful when compromise would have been easier, faster, and more comfortable. Those moments mattered. The world may never know how often you chose righteousness while nobody was looking, but heaven counted every one. This is what many people miss. The private yes is often louder in the spirit than the public performance. The hidden sacrifice often echoes longer than the visible success. Your unseen obedience built a record in heaven long before it built a reputation on earth. Each time you fought off pride in silence, each time you kept going, when discouragement tried to shut you down, each time you honored God with your body, your thoughts, your choices, and your attention, something was being documented beyond human eyes. The hidden place became your training ground. It became the furnace where motives were purified, where consistency was developed, where integrity took root beneath the soil before any fruit appeared above the ground. This is why some people misread your season. They thought you were stagnant because they could not see what was happening within you. They thought nothing was moving because the warfare was internal and the growth was invisible. But some of the deepest promotions in the kingdom begin as interior rearrangements long before they become public manifestations. You are learning how to obey without applause. You are learning how to be faithful without being seen. You are learning how to choose God when no audience existed to reward the choice. That kind of obedience carries extraordinary weight because it proves that your devotion is not dependent on attention. It proves that your integrity is not a costume worn for crowds. It proves that your relationship with God is not built on performance but on surrender. And now some of the very doors that seem ready to open are opening, not because of what you recently did in public, but because of what you consistently chose in private. Hidden obedience never stays hidden forever. Sooner or later, what was forged in silence begins to shape visible favor. The world sees the door open and calls it sudden. Heaven sees the same door and calls it timed. Because heaven remembers the nights, the fasts, the quiet refusals, the trembling prayers, the hidden tears, the moments you almost gave up but did not. None of it was lost. None of it was wasted. None of it fell to the ground unnoticed. And part of the reason those silent victories carried so much weight is because you stayed humble when pride called your name. Pride is rarely as obvious as people imagine. It does not always arrive with loud arrogance or boastful speech. Sometimes it comes through woundedness. Sometimes it disguises itself as the urge to prove your worth to those who overlooked you. Sometimes it enters through the back door of rejection, whispering that if people do not recognize what is on your life, you should force them to. Sometimes it appears as the temptation to defend yourself endlessly, expose everyone who wronged you, parade your receipts and build your own vindication with your own hands. You had opportunities to do exactly that. You had enough pain to justify it in the eyes of many people. You had enough evidence, enough intelligence, enough words, enough reasons to explain yourself, defend your image, and make your value undeniable by force. Yet something deeper held you back. Not fear but reverence, not weakness but surrender. You began to understand that vindication built by ego never carries the same oil as vindication released by God. So instead of feeding pride, you kept building altars. instead of making every wound a stage you carried many of them into the secret place. Instead of forcing honor out of people who were committed to misunderstanding you, you allowed God to deal with timing, exposure and reward, and that is humility. And humility is one of the clearest signs that a person is spiritually ready for more. Humility does not mean denying what God has put inside you. It means refusing to worship it. It means you can carry gifting without making gifting your God. It means you can know your value without becoming intoxicated by self-importance. It means you can endure being unseen without scrambling to manufacture recognition before it's time. This was one of your hidden victories. You did not always get the credit you deserved. You were not always honored in the rooms where you gave your best. You were not always defended by the people who should have defended you. But you did not let that pain turn into self-exaltation. You kept choosing surrender over spectacle. You kept choosing patience over pride. You kept choosing to be shaped in secret rather than inflated in public. That is rare. And because it is rare, it becomes precious in the courts of heaven. God can lift a humble person without losing them to the intoxication of visibility. God can increase someone whose roots go down deeper than their ego rises upward. God can trust a person with more when that person has learned that the way up in the kingdom often passes through hiddenness, submission and restraint. You stayed low enough to hear God clearly. You stayed soft enough to repent quickly. You stayed surrendered enough not to grab what was not yet yours. And now that humility has become part of your foundation, what comes next will have substance beneath it. It will not be a temporary rise built on performance. It will be a sustainable lifting supported by inward posture. So do not despise the seasons when humility felt expensive. Do not regret the times you chose silence over self-promotion. Do not question the hidden roads where surrender looked slower than pride. Those roads were preparing you for a future that can hold more weight than your past could have carried. And that is the beauty of what heaven has been doing all along. God was not merely asking whether you could survive trials. He was shaping the kind of person who could be trusted after the trial ended. And as heaven continued to examine the hidden architecture of your soul, one of the clearest proofs of who you were becoming was that you blessed others while you were bleeding, because there is a kind of love that only reveals its true depth when it is asked to pour while empty, to serve while sought to strengthen while secretly trembling. And you have known that road more intimately than most people ever will. Many saw your kindness, but they did not see the cost of it. They heard your encouragement, but they did not hear the ache underneath it. They received your prayers, your wisdom, your support, your patience, your presence, but they did not always understand that some of what nourished them was drawn from a place in you that had already been wounded. There were seasons when you were carrying grief with one hand and lifting someone else with the other. There were days when your own heart was tired, yet you still found language to comfort someone whose pain had become visible while yours remained hidden. There were nights when you had to gather your own scattered spirit in private after spending the day being a shelter for others. That was not weakness. That was not foolishness. That was evidence of a Christ-like nature being formed in you at a very high cost. The world tends to define strength as surplus, as if only the person who feels whole has the right to pour, but the kingdom reveals a holier mystery. Sometimes the deepest ministry flows through a person who has learned how to make pain kneel before love. Sometimes the most powerful act of obedience is to remain generous when life has given you every excuse to become self-protective and closed. You did not always have abundance in the worldly sense, yet you still gave what you could. A steady word, a merciful response, a prayer whispered over someone who never knew how much your own soul needed the same tenderness. This is why your path resembles the Spirit of Christ more than you realize. Christ did not wait for comfort before he loved. He did not reserve compassion only for the moments when he felt least burdened. Even in suffering he still poured. Even in betrayal he still spoke life. Even under the weight of agony he remained aligned with the Father's heart. And in your own human, imperfect, tested way, you have walked in that same pattern. You kept giving not because pain was absent, but because love was stronger than the temptation to withhold. You kept blessing not because people always deserved it, but because your obedience was tied to heaven, not to human fairness. This is why so much of your hidden sacrifice carries tremendous weight in the spirit. When a person blesses while bleeding, heaven takes notice because it means love is no longer dependent on convenience. It means character has matured beyond transaction. It means the heart has learned how to reflect divine nature instead of merely reacting to human behavior. And that kind of heart becomes dangerous to darkness because darkness expects pain to produce cruelty. It expects betrayal to produce hardness. It expects exhaustion to produce indifference. But when someone keeps choosing compassion without becoming careless, keeps choosing generosity without becoming naive, keeps choosing tenderness without abandoning discernment, it confuses the logic of hell. It proves that the life of God has found a vessel that will not easily turn into its opposite. This is why your bleeding season was not meaningless. It was training, it was measurement, it was revelation. It showed heaven how much of your yes was rooted in God and not in ease. And because you kept pouring in ways others never fully understood, you are now standing at the edge of divine reimbursement, where the strength you released in secret begins to return in multiplied form. But before that return could be safely entrusted to you, you also had to prove that you could keep your spirit clean in a dirty season. And this may have been one of the most difficult tests of all, because external pain is hard enough, but internal contamination is what destroys many destinies. You lived through situations where bitterness would have been easier than blessing, where anger would have felt more natural than worship, where revenge would have sounded more justified than restraint. The culture around you often rewarded sharpness, celebrated exposure, and called retaliation empowerment. Yet something in you knew that if you let your spirit absorb the filth being thrown at you, the real loss would not be what people said or did, but what you allowed to live inside you afterward. So you fought for cleanliness. You fought for it in your speech, refusing to let your mouth become a sewer for poison simply because others had spoken carelessly about you. You fought for it in your motives, bringing your thoughts back under God when offense wanted to build a throne in your mind. You fought for it in your posture, choosing surrender over spectacle prayer, over gossip, obedience, over emotional indulgence. This does not mean you felt nothing. It means you stopped treating every feeling as a command. It means you understood that emotions are real, but they are not always righteous leaders. There were nights when your mind wanted to rehearse every offense until anger felt holy. There were mornings when you could have justified exposing everything you knew. There were moments when silence felt humiliating and restraint felt misunderstood. But your spirit kept hearing a deeper instruction: stay clean, stay yielded, stay aligned. Do not let what came against you rewrite what God is building in you. That is a profound form of warfare. Purity is not fragility. Purity is disciplined allegiance. It is the decision to protect the oil in your vessel from contamination even when provocation is constant. It is the refusal to let darkness define the terms of your response. It is the ability to remain honest about pain without turning pain into permission for corruption. Many people underestimate how much spiritual authority is preserved by cleanliness. They think power is only about visible gifting, but heaven often entrusts greater weight to those who have learned how to keep their inner world uncluttered by hatred, envy, pettiness, and secret compromise. You did not always get this right perfectly, because no human being does, but you stayed quick to repent, quick to return, quick to lay things down before they took root too deeply. That matters. Repentance kept your spirit breathable. Humility kept your conscience soft. Worship kept your perspective higher than your wound. And because you chose cleanliness in a season that could have easily made you dirty, you preserved something precious. You preserved your ability to hear clearly. You preserved your tenderness before God. You preserved your capacity to carry more without collapsing under the weight of unresolved contamination. You did not just survive a dirty season. You moved through it with your lamp still holding oil, with your garments still guarded, with your conscience still responsive. That is one reason heaven can now trust you with more. Because promotion in the kingdom is not simply about talent being seen. It is about vessels being proven, and your promotion is the reward for hidden faithfulness, not random success, not luck, not coincidence, not a sudden turn in fortune that has no history behind it. What is coming carries a backstory written in secret decisions, private obedience, quiet consistency, and invisible surrender. Heaven promotes differently than the world. The world often elevates charisma before character noise, before substance visibility, before integrity. But God searches the hidden life first. He asks what you do when there is no applause, how you handle waiting, whether your devotion survives obscurity, whether your convictions remain intact when compromise would speed things up. You've already answered many of those questions with your life. You kept showing up when no one celebrated your effort. You kept obeying when results seemed delayed. You kept sowing into what God said even when the ground looked barren. You kept carrying the call before the call carried visible reward. That is faithfulness. Faithfulness is not flashy. It is repetitive, patient, often unnoticed, and deeply holy. It is the person who keeps honoring God in ordinary hours. It is the one who keeps choosing righteousness when shortcuts remain available. It is the one who continues serving with integrity, even when their season feels hidden, even when others seem to leap ahead through easier routes. Heaven has watched that pattern in you, and now elevation is not being released because you campaigned for it, but because your history in secret has created capacity for it. More favor is coming because you learned how to steward smaller measures. More influence is coming because your motives have been tested in obscurity. More authority is coming because you did not use hiddenness as an excuse to become careless. Visibility without hidden faithfulness produces collapse. Influence without deep roots produces corruption. But what God is building in you has been strengthened underground, and that means what rises will not be as easily shaken. This next season is not just about blessing, it is about trust. God is trusting you with more because your private life told the truth about your public calling. He is entrusting you with greater territory because you did not abandon integrity while waiting for wider ground. He is releasing doors because your character has already been practicing how to walk through them. This is why you must not mislabel what is happening as mere opportunity. It is promotion. It is heaven responding to years of invisible yes. It is the quiet file of your obedience opening into visible consequence. It is the throne answering what the crowd never saw, and because that answer is now approaching, what was secretly formed will soon be publicly seen. So much of what people called weakness was actually hidden strengthening. So much of what they called delay was divine development. So much of what they interpreted as being overlooked was simply God refusing to unveil prematurely what still needed more depth beneath it. Others judged by surface movement, God judged by internal formation. While some assumed nothing was happening, roots were going down. While some thought you were behind, heaven was calibrating your weight. While some dismissed your hidden season as emptiness, the Spirit was carving chambers within you large enough to hold future oil, future wisdom, future responsibility. That is why the manifestation now will feel sudden to many, but it will not be sudden to you, not really. It will feel like the external world finally catching up to something heaven has been building for a long time. The fruit that appears will not be borrowed fruit. It will be the honest result of endurance, prayer, humility, repentance, discipline, and surrender. People may marvel at the open doors, the unusual favor, the increase in peace, the weight in your words, the beauty of your timing, but they will not have the full language for what produced it unless they understand what hidden obedience costs. They did not see your midnight wrestling. They did not see the thoughts you had to cast down, the appetites you had to deny, the tears you had to wipe away before walking back into duty. They did not always witness the brutal simplicity of staying faithful one day at a time. But now what was forged in those private hours will begin to take visible shape. Your steadiness will show, your authority will show, your healed responses will show, your discernment will show, your oil will show. The same places that once misread your quiet may begin to notice your weight. The same people who underestimated your hiddenness may find themselves unable to deny the evidence of God's hand. This is not about revenge, it is about revelation. God is revealing what He can produce in a yielded life. He is making visible the consequence of staying near Him in secret. And this visible fruit will not merely impress people, it will instruct them. It will confront the lie that hidden seasons are pointless. It will expose the lie that only loud people are advancing. It will challenge the assumption that obedience goes unrewarded. In this sense, your life becomes a sermon without needing a microphone. It becomes a testimony that formation matters, that slow faithfulness matters, that heaven's timing is not negligence but craftsmanship. So do not be surprised when what seemed buried begins to bloom. Buried is not the same as abandoned. Hidden is not the same as forgotten. The seed must disappear before it can multiply. You have lived enough now to know that some of God's most important work happens where human impatience cannot interfere. And as this public fruit begins to appear, this new season will glorify God, not ego, because that is one of the clearest differences between divine promotion and self-exaltation. God is not lifting you merely to comfort your vanity or decorate your identity with spiritual language. He is lifting you so that your life becomes evidence of His ways. Your story is meant to say something about His faithfulness, His justice, His patience, His ability to refine, restore, and reveal. The breakthrough coming is not only about what you finally receive, it is about what others learn when they witness the result of Christlike endurance. They will see that obedience was not wasted. They will see that suffering did not cancel your calling. They will see that humility was not weakness, that purity was not pointless, that secret prayer did not evaporate into song. Your life will begin to preach these truths without striving. The favor on you will not just feel like personal relief, it will function as revelation. It will tell doubters that God still honors clean hands and a surrendered heart. It will tell the wounded that love can survive betrayal without becoming counterfeit. It will tell the delayed that hidden preparation can end in undeniable manifestation. This matters because ego always wants to make elevation about self, but kingdom elevation always circles back to witness. It says, look what God can do with a vessel that stayed yielded. Look what God can build in someone who refused to let pain become their master. Look what God can release when hidden faithfulness matures to the point of public trust. Your promotion will carry this kind of message if you keep your heart aligned. That is why you must guard against the subtle temptation to turn vindication into self-worship. Honor is safe only when it keeps bowing. Favor is beautiful only when it remains grateful. Influence is healthy only when it remembers the altar that produced it. The same humility that held you in secret must travel with you into visibility. The same dependence that carried you through hidden tests must remain alive when results become obvious. This new season is not license to forget the furnace. It is proof that the furnace was fruitful. It is not permission to become self-impressed. It is invitation to become more available. God is glorified when the elevated one stays low in spirit, when the favored one stays tender, when the trusted one stays teachable. So let this season become worship. Let success become testimony, not intoxication. Let recognition become responsibility, not an identity fix. Let every opened door remind you that heaven did this. Heaven timed this heaven, guarded this heaven, answered this. And with that understanding, you must walk boldly into the season you earned in secret, because one of the final temptations after hidden faithfulness is false humility that tries to shrink when favor finally arrives. Do not do that. Do not sabotage answered prayer by acting as though you are unworthy of what heaven carefully prepared. Humility does not mean resisting God's gift. Humility means receiving it with clean hands and a bowed heart. There is a difference between arrogance and agreement. Arrogance says I made myself. Agreement says God formed me for this, and I will not insult his workmanship by pretending otherwise. So walk boldly now. Not loudly, not pridefully, not with a need to dominate, but with settled confidence. Let your posture match the oil on your life. Let your decisions reflect the maturity that was forged in your hidden season. Stop apologizing for the depth that came from years of refining. Stop shrinking to fit the comfort level of people who only liked you when you were easier to overlook. Stop dimming your language, your convictions, your clarity, or your peace because someone else has not yet made peace with what God is doing in you. This is the hour to receive what heaven is releasing. Say yes to the door, say yes to the assignment, say yes to the platform, the influence, the opportunity, the favor, the responsibility, the visibility, the increase if and when God places it before you. Your hidden season did not exist to make you permanently hesitant. It existed to make you ready, and readiness must eventually move. The light formed in secret is meant to shine in the open. The authority tested in private is meant to function in public. The wisdom carved in sorrow is meant to guide, protect, and build. You do not honor your process by forever remaining concealed. You honor it by carrying its fruit courageously. That means when favor shows up, you do not retreat into disbelief. When people begin to recognize what God has planted, you do not deflect with chronic self-erasure. When the moment arrives, you step into it with reverence and strength. You carry your crown without forgetting your knees. You carry your influence without losing your innocence. You carry your voice without abandoning your listening. This is boldness in the kingdom, not self-invention, but full cooperation with what God has authored. And as you walk into this season, remember that you are not entering it empty-handed. You are carrying proof. You are carrying tears that became oil wounds, that became wisdom, delays that became depth silence, that became strength surrender, that became authority. Nothing was wasted. The very things that almost broke you became the places where heaven marked you for more. And that is why your conclusion is now clear, your test is over, and heaven is responding. The tears were recorded, the humility was recorded, the purity was recorded, the hidden obedience was recorded. The nights of worship when no one knew how hard it was were recorded. The moments you chose love over bitterness, silence over self-defense, prayer over reaction, surrender over pride, all of it was seen. Your proving season is ending and your promotion season is beginning. What God is about to release will be undeniable evidence that Christlike love, humble endurance, and faithful character are never overlooked in the kingdom. Let others call it sudden if they need to. You know better. You know this is response. You know this is the fruit of a hidden covenant lived honestly before God. So receive it with gratitude. Steward it with reverence. Walk in it with confidence. And never again question whether heaven noticed your hidden walk, because the answer is about to become visible.